Wayne, how do you see, what can we do? I mean, we talked early in this discussion about this issue needing to be kept in the forefront. What do you really see, besides organizations such as Pamela's, how do we keep this issue in the forefront?
Well, I think we first have to recognize the elephant in the room. And every time we see abuse by members of Congress or abuse by others in government or in private corporations, we need to have the government stick with it. We know in the Franklin scandal, the Department of Justice did a very cursory investigation.
Yes.
And it never went anywhere. No one
and
was,
in many instances even wanted to blame the victims.
They blamed the victims as well. Some of the children who came forward were then found themselves indicted for perjury. This is nonsense. They always let the big fish get away in these cases. I think what we need to do is have a legitimate and a real investigation by potentially the Congress or maybe by a presidential commission, but they can't load it up with people who obviously are from organizations who have an issue. Keep the intelligence people out of there, keep a lot of the people who may have their fingerprints on this out of there. But we need to, I'm suggesting sort of a truth commission, but also a blue ribbon panel to look at the past, look at what's going on now, and prevent this from happening again in the future. And if need be, they should be able to have the authority to pass on to the Justice Department information that could lead to criminal indictments.
Pamela, we have laws on the books that are there to ensure that people who prey upon children go to prison. Congressman Foley, not in jail. Many of the Catholic priests from the church scandals, not in jail. Individuals that were in the Franklin scandal, not in jail. Mm-hmm. How are we supposed to remedy this situation when those who have the most power, the power brokers, as are referenced in the Franklin scandal, are not held accountable for the atrocities that they're committing against children?
Right. Well, you know, I had alluded to training, not alluded, I had noted the need for training. And
yes.
Training is we're not only talking about the public, you know, Jane and John Q. public, you know, we're talking about judges, lawyers, etc. And what's happening in the courtroom in this country, as well as the rest of the world, is problematic as well. You know, when we're talking about the weighing of evidence, and we're solely talking about the weighing of evidence, and judges and lawyers, as well as everybody else, really don't understand the issue. How do you make a judgment without understanding an issue? In our courtrooms, for example, when there is a perpetrator or when there is a woman trying to protect her child, the woman is often presenting as crazy. She's crazy, look at her, she's falling apart. Well, of course she's falling apart. Her child is being sexually abused and she can't protect her child. It's being used, her behavior and other aspects of the courtroom are being used incredibly well by lawyers and others who are being afforded by men who have the money to get them off. So we need to look at our laws. There is some training being done in law schools and medical schools. That has to go across the board in this country. It needs to be extremely widespread. It needs to be in every law school. It needs to be training for judges. Stop the Silence did a training for judges and other court-related personnel. And so we had everybody in one room listening to the same information that was state-of-the-art information from the top researchers and practitioners in this country as well as internationally. And if we provide that information across the board to these diverse types of people who are in the position of making decisions, and then they are able to allow to come together to speak, then everybody can start to understand what is in fact happening out there as well as in their courtroom and make appropriate decisions. I'm not saying don't weigh the evidence, but I'm saying understand what you're seeing.
Wayne, based upon your investigatory, criminal investigatory experience, how much of this problem has to do with, in many instances, the lapse of time between the trial or the accusation of abuse and the actual act. We will have a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 25-year-old saying, this priest abused me when I was 7. So now we have a 10-year, 12-year, 15-year span of time. And so we're dealing with memory. We're dealing with clouded memory. We're dealing with all different types of issues that can, in a court with a sharp attorney, can really play into the defense's hands and do a disservice to the prosecution.
And just one comment,
Sure.
we're also dealing with statute of limitations.
Yes.
Enormous
Absolutely.
problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, in the Navy investigation, of course, this commanding officer was subject to a court-martial, and when the FBI and the Navy realized how big this operation was, they did move rather fast. But then we found out that there was issues from previous commands this guy was stationed at in the Bay Area. And the Navy has
similar to priests in other parishes.
And they move. He gets screened for command, which is the worst thing because some of the children that were being molested and subject to these videos being made were Navy dependent children. So you've got the commanding officer, who everyone's supposed to look up to, who has a lot of power in that position. So the Navy was of two minds. They said, well, we want to participate with the FBI, but then there was they were looking at the embarrassment and the fallout from this story getting out. And then there was a conscious effort to suppress the news from the local, by the local TV station. They were not given the right to even come near any of the Navy property to interview anyone. So this, of course, was coming from Washington, from the Chief of Naval Operations, Secretary of Navy level. So we have, again, it's like ignore the problem. It's an aberration. Well, it wasn't an aberration. He wasn't the only person in the Navy that was involved with this, but they did the court-martial. He got time in prison, but nothing was done to help those children who this was the commanding officer who everybody looks up to. There was no counseling provided. There were counselors, I understand, ready at Bethesda Naval Hospital to come out to that, but no, they tamped it down, and we see this with the Catholic Church abuse. It's the same story. Ignore it, tamp it down. Let's get it off the news. Congress, the White House, FBI, all the same.
Pamela, the same question that I posed to Wayne. In many instances, you have such a span of time between the trial or accusation and the actual occurrence.
Right.
Talk about the problems that can cause in terms of a prosecution.
Well, there are a number of problems. We've gotten a little better in this country at interviewing the kids. What used to happen, and still does in some locations, is that these kids are asked over and over and over and over again, what happened, what happened, what happened. The police ask them, the therapist asks them, the doctor asks them, and there's a lot of recantation. And often, because it's also not understood why kids recant, it's very common for kids to recant, particularly if they're asked 20 times what happened. They don't want to talk about it anymore. They're scared, they're ashamed. We seem to not realize what we're asking these children to do, to talk about intimate acts on their body to strangers. If I went up to a stranger on the street and I said, tell me about your sex life, I mean, it would be outrageous,
Especially when that child has probably been told by the violator,
Absolutely.
if you tell the
That's
following
right.
things will happen,
That's
or
right.
this is happening because you actually wanted this to happen.
That's exactly right. And the kids are, being told that their families are going to be hurt or killed, that nobody's going to believe them, that they wanted it, that it was their fault. I mean, we forget that children are children, and they're still developing in a very, very meaningful way. They don't have the background, the understanding, the experience in life to understand what's happening to them. And so they do tend to take it on themselves, particularly if they're being told that it is their fault. So we really need to understand the entire environment for these kids. But you had asked about the length of time.
Yes.
So there's the recantation. Of course, there are the statute of limitations, and there are groups in this country. We try to support them and going literally literally state to state, changing those laws so that if somebody is sexually abused at the age of 7 and comes forward at the age of 25, say, that there's still a possibility of bringing forward the case. And in fact, just as an aside, most kids, 1 out of 10 kids actually tells, and most people don't come forward for decades, if at all. More than 32% of men and more than 42% of women never tell anybody in their lifetimes something about it.
Dr. Pamela Pine, Wayne Madsen, thank you both very much. The Franklin scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. Our children are our greatest assets. And as a society, protecting our children should be the first and foremost element of what we do as people, as parents, as adults. And unfortunately, too many of our children are being trafficked, are exposed to child trafficking. Too many of our children are exposed to child sexual abuse. Too many of our children are victimized by child pornography. And as a society, it is incumbent upon us to see to it that the perpetrators of this violence are caught, are prosecuted, and are severely punished. Again, the book, The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. For those of you who want to contact us at Epilogue, please go to epilogue@presstv.com. Thank you very much for watching. I'm your host, Wilmer Leon. See you next time.